It's been said that major advances in civilization are processes that all but wreck the societies in which they happen. Well, the motor car is here to prove it. It's like litter when parked, and the car has given us another religion besides football. It has its own wayside shrines, it has produced a dedicated army of acolytes, and it demands sacrifices. On the move, the car is lethal. It has turned shopping centres like Sauchiehall Street into 4-lane racetracks. Coming to terms with the car has meant giving into it. There's some hope of reclaiming streets like this in new plans for traffic-free shopping areas in the city. But meantime, the private car has disrupted other older forms of public transport, and not just the tramway system. Some railway stations are no longer places of magic, but have to suffer the indignity of becoming storage spaces for that upstart, the motor car. The railways have fought back to some extent with the electric suburban services. But just as they smash their way into the city centre, clearing the slums of the day, the motor car has been repeating the process. Like a giant abstract sculpture, an inner ring road grows in the city, homage to the motor car, and the end of Glasgow as most of us know it. The Kingston Bridge, part of the new ring road, like a massive monument the ancient Egyptians would have been proud of. And a monument it may become. Already experts predict the end of the motor car era. Meantime, the destruction of the old railway city goes ahead. There can't be many people who will regret the clearing of so much of Glasgow's slum property that should have been down years ago. But when we see how much of the city is to be torn down, more than for the 19th century railway, then it's time to start asking questions. Already the planners admit that only half the ring road is being built, with a 10-year wait for the other half. And who knows what the thinking on the motor car will be by then. A side effect of the motorway plans is that other parts of the city are threatened. Great Western Road, for example, the broad and straight highway that runs through the West End and links with the road to Loch Lomond. There are plans to close off some of its junctions and to widen it into a dual carriageway. This would link with the inner ring road until other radial motorways are built. The Director of Planning of the Corporation of Glasgow, R.D. Mansley.
The anticipated increase in traffic volumes on Great Western Road over the next few years mean that traffic will increase from today's volumes of 20,000 vehicles a day to something of the order of 50,000 vehicles a day or slightly higher. At the present moment in Great Western Road, at the peak hours, people come into the city, duck around the back streets to the extent that the traffic on the residential streets near to Great Western Road is greater than the traffic travelling along Great Western Road. Now that, to my mind, is fundamentally wrong. Traffic should be canalised on its own main route. The other routes should be relegated to their main function as residential streets.
Dr. George Gordon Browning, convener of the Great Western Road Conservation Committee.
I think the Glasgow Corporation's proposals would be completely detrimental to the area as a whole. Everybody knows that, in fact, the buildings themselves are of great merit, but the whole concept of the Great Western Road, with its layout, its topography, with the hills and its trees and the proportions between the trees and the gardens and the terraces themselves, if the corporation's proposals were carried out, the essential layout would in fact be destroyed. And this, I would think, would cause a great harm to the overall concept of the area. Great Western Road runs right through the centre of it. At the moment forms in fact the link between the areas on either side, which is well served with schools and other forms of recreation. Now the corporation's proposals would in fact cause Great Western Road to be an impassable barrier right down the centre of the road, with crossing limited to a very small number of intersections. And this would severely inhibit the movements of cross traffic off this residential area.
So Glasgow, a city spawned by the railroad, may be on the verge of destruction by the motorcar and the motorway. Where then do we go from here? The Professor of Urban Planning at the University of Strathclyde, R.E. Nicholl.
Glasgow's transport system must react and reflect the new growing demands and the new structure for the city and the region. If we think about Glasgow itself, to start off with, even though we're building the motorways, particularly around the city centre, because of congestion and because of demand, in spite of the building motorways, 80% of all movement to the central area must be by public transport in the future. That means public transport by rail and bus, much better public transport facilities. Well, we have possibilities within the city centre now, existing underground tunnels which are there and can be exploited, but need to be modernised, electrified and linked up with the existing blue train systems.
Another possibility. Part of the city's transport system that has survived for more than 70 years, the underground, hasn't changed basically. Original rolling stock, much improved, is still used. It has no escalators and one lift that doesn't often work. It's noisy, drafty and uncomfortable. It's also the fastest, safest and most efficient transport in Glasgow. There's a train every 3 minutes. They run continuously on outer and inner circles, through the city centre and to stations north, south and west of it. Tracks never cross, and experts say it's a brilliant concept that could offer a solution for future high-speed public transport. A series of circles with interconnecting stations might be one answer. Another, as suggested, is the reuse of railway tunnels under the city centre. Meantime, the tunnels lie abandoned, haunted by the ghosts of Victorian ambition, an ambition that destroyed the dear green place and encased Glasgow in the problems of the railway age.
Well, let's be quite clear about one thing. We cannot solve Glasgow's problems within Glasgow. The economics of the city are going to change, the economic base, the employment must rely on new facilities which are going to become available, exploiting deep water, etc. The renewal of the city, which I'm sure you've heard about, the Gorbals and the Hutchison Towns and the Mary Hills, these renewal projects must displace large numbers of people to provide the new hospitals, and new schools, new universities, and new motorways. All these will displace people. In fact, it's not only Glasgow, but the other parts of the Clyde Valley are so congested that, in my view, something like 500,000 people have got to be displaced from the centre of the region, which is the Clyde Valley, to the outskirts. So, in other words, from the centre here in Glasgow and the Clyde Valley, between now and the end of the century, 500,000 people have got to move out to the new towns, the expanded areas, and in particular, in my view, the Ayrshire coast.
So the Glasgow we knew seems about to slip into history. 500,000 people may not want a trip down the Clyde, but locomotives aren't built here anymore, the world doesn't come for a third of its ships. They may have to go. A quieter, emptier river now. There are fewer jobs for dockers and some docks are no longer in use. Modernisation has meant the beginning of a move down the river to deep water at Greenock, some 20 miles away. A new terminal to handle container cargoes is now in operation there. And again, the unthinkable. A shipyard pulled down for new houses. Glasgow unmaking the Clyde as the Clyde unmakes Glasgow. Many solutions have been tried. In the 30s, garden suburbs. In the 40s and 50s, yesterday's answer, a recreation of crowded tenement life. Huge housing estates were built on Glasgow's last available land, but they lacked city amenities, shops, pubs, cinemas. There were social and cultural wastelands, ghettos for the working class. This type of housing ended at the Green Belt, where the city ran out of land. Glasgow's expansion was over. the dear green place was only a memory. A later solution, vertical instead of horizontal streets, and built in cleared areas of the city itself. Despite the playgrounds, people complain they're isolated from their children and suffer high living blue. They say there aren't enough lifts, and when help is needed sometimes, it can't come to your door, only to the bottom of your lift shaft. Streets don't mean the same when there are streets in the sky. But like grass breaking through concrete, the human spirit manifests itself among the towers of these new communities. This school band parades in the Gorbals area, the once notorious Gorbals. This is now part of a city redevelopment scheme costing more than £100 million. This massive rebuilding begins to look like the Victorian explosion all over again, and people, including the planners, are already beginning to ask if this is the way to rebuild the city. How much should we destroy? How much preserve and modernize? Are tower blocks the answer to Glasgow's rehousing problems? And what about the thousands who must wait years for a decent home because rebuilding takes so long? So before we replace one lot of concentrated real estate with another, perhaps the time has come to listen to the young, who want to keep the options open and tackle our problems now rather than in the future, who question the decisions of authority everywhere because they believe we should all have a say in them. Perhaps there's a strategy there for all of us. Otherwise, future generations may wonder at the energy that created so many concrete Stonehenges. Glasgow, the dear green place, the cathedral city, the crowded railway city, menaced by the motorcar and the monster of rehousing. A city in turmoil, an ancient city on the edge of a new beginning.